Welcome one and all to the Stock Up Podcast, your one-stop shop for stocking up on the information you need to qualify for the Pro Tour. My name is Alex. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jacob Negro. Jacob, how was your weekend?
It was pretty good.
Anything exciting? Just watching the spotlight a bit, maybe?
Yeah, I'm kind of not that interested in Standard anymore, so I tuned in a little. I saw that, Cauldron unsurprisingly dominated, but Mono Red did take it down. So
yeah, it was more boring than I would have hoped. I watched a little bit, and then, once I realized what was happening, I stopped. It is funny that Mono, it's sort of like the last spotlight where Is It Prowess did really well. Mono Red was there to kind of squash its good weekend, in a sense, by taking it all.
Yeah, like the Pro Tour. And the Mono Red deck also, you had two bans and is kind of completely different. They've been using cards that are they're not quite Mage Bane Lizard, though I think in their sideboards, but the Razor, like Needlehead, I think it's called, and the Scalding Viper, which are Punisher cards in a different way, specifically aimed at the Cauldron deck, which casts a lot of spells and draws a lot of cards. So
yeah, it's interesting. It shows probably kind of what mattered there is really more of a structural thing, where like one of the ways maybe you can attack those decks is by going under them.
I just think...
not so much that like the mice were broken or whatever, although obviously they were good.
Yeah, I mean the mice were definitely really strong, but I agree with you that the Cauldron deck is just really good at presenting multiple different avenues of being really proactively powerful. So doing your own kind of proactive thing that is trumping it in some way, which in the case of that Mono Red deck seemed to be playing these cards specifically geared for them that kind of hate them out, but also you're already kind of getting to the board first. Things that just ping them a little bit wouldn't be very useful if you weren't pressuring their life total really heavily like the red deck is. So it makes sense.
It could be a kind of a thing where the Izzet decks were caught with their pants down because the format was so... there weren't a ton of aggro decks on people's radar, I don't think, basically.
It's kind of the same issue that happened at the Pro Tour. The Cauldron decks have been almost going to zero Torch the Tower main deck, for example.
Right, yeah.
And that's not even to say, I didn't think Torch the Tower was awful in mirrors. Sometimes it was really important against Marauding Mako, especially on the early turns, to not get run over. But it's the matter that, like, they kind of have this core proactive part of their deck, and then they can only afford to play so much interaction. And I think people just finally decided they're going to play so many mirror matches that they should just play 4 Into the Flood Maws and 3 Abrades or some Spell Pierces, just things that work specifically like really well in the mirror. Not just something that's like passable and usually good in the mirror, but compared to those other cards, they just ended up moving more towards more copies of those.
Yeah, and then otherwise Standard's a bit rough. It could definitely use a shake-up. We'll have to see if they decide to just wait for their next ban window or if they take action. I have another local RCQ in a couple weeks, and I might play it, but other than that, Standard's in a rough spot. I know the next Pro Tour is Modern, and you've sort of been preparing for that. Have you been playing a lot of Magic Online, or do you mostly just...
I've been playing a good amount.
Okay, cool. And I'm sure you watch Twitch streamers and stuff like that and pay attention to some of the decks.
Yeah, we'll be talking about it today, but I watch Nassif more than most other streamers, and I'm also teaming with him, so pretty funny.
Yeah, he's fun to watch. He's he's always doing something pretty creative and always trying something different. So you get a lot of information by seeing what he's up to. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about Modern. With Edge of Eternities, there's actually been quite a few new cards hitting the scene, so we're going to talk about those, maybe some new decks, and how the existing decks stand up to all that. Kind of not so much an overview, but more of like a checking back in with Modern type of situation.
Yeah, exactly. Our first episode, we went over pretty much in Goldfish order Modern decks and what they're about, and today I'm thinking we're really only going to talk about decks that are new or have significantly changed since the last time we talked about it.
Yeah, totally. So before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you can find us over on patreon.com/stockuppodcast. We have one tier at the moment. It's $1 a month. With that tier, you get access to all of our content, all of our exclusive posts, and of course, you could always find us on YouTube, listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. So, new cards in Modern. Mostly I've been seeing a little bit of Consult the Star Charts and the Quantum Riddler. Riddler in particular, people have been putting in lots of Blink decks, I've seen.
Quantum Riddler is definitely the big kind of new shiny thing in Modern right now. It's catching on really quickly. There's kind of been a lot of brews surrounding it, but there's kind of three major homes I've noticed that I'm going to talk about, which are kind of just going straight blue-white, which is seemingly getting more popular. Which those decks look very similar to the Orzhov or Esper midrange decks from before that are using Philia and Ephemerate and Solitude. I think some key differences is these decks are also including a new Edge of Eternities card. The Angel, which I had it pulled up, but I've lost it, so let me pull it up again.
Oh, the Starfield Shepherd.
Yeah.
Three white,
Shepherd.
3/2 flying, warp
Yep.
1 and a white. When he enters, you search for basic planes or a creature with mana value 1 or less.
Yeah, so now because you have this card, people are looking for, good 1-drops to play with it, and they found the good old combo of Guide of Souls and Ocelot Pride.
Oh, wow.
Which is great to assemble in multiple copies. You'll also see usually one Mockingbird in these types of decks, which is a little bit more flexible and maybe can copy something bigger in the late game, like a 5-mana Solitude or things like that. In addition to helping you hit your land drops in a deck that kind of has a lot to do with their mana, getting basic planes comes up, in the early turns probably way more often than these 1-drops. I wouldn't call this deck an aggro deck. The Guide Pride combo, what makes it so strong in Boros is that it's pretty good across the entire game. It's really good at rebuilding a board from nothing.
Mm-hmm. So this list I'm looking at, you sent me, got second place in a Modern challenge.
Yep.
For if people want to reference it on, what was this, yesterday, the 1st September by the Adonis. So yeah, I mean, it kind of looks like the Esper Blink decks, but maybe, a little more streamlined with the 2 colors. Got Hylia and again, the 1-drops, Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride. So a little bit lower to the ground, but similar strategy, right? Of just a mid-range deck that's trying to get a lot of value by blinking, in this case, Quantum Riddler and Starfield Shepherd.
Yeah, and also Solitude.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I guess notably a thing that is in the white-black mid-range decks, but not in this deck, is Flicker Wisp. But Flicker Wisp doesn't really combo with Warp, because you have to pay the mana for the Warp and then cast a Flicker Wisp, which is just 5 mana anyways. Whereas,
right.
The black-white versions kind of have that nice draw of going turn 2 Overlord, turn 3 Flicker Wisp on the Overlord. So that's certainly a combo they're missing out on. The upside is, first of all, by cutting a color, their mana is better, and then they're also, moving towards this Starfield Shepherd package, and Guide plus Pride lets them play to the board a little faster, I'm sure. It's also a lot of life gain in some games, especially with Hylia.
And then the Esper decks, do they usually have Psychic Frog? I feel like I remember seeing Psychic Frogs.
Yeah, they did, and then I think people definitely started all realizing they're not going to fit them in, and now they're playing Riddler themselves.
Okay. I mean, it is kind of off plan. I mean, I guess it's just a good value creature, but
yeah, and that, to be clear, is the Esper Philia Overlord deck. The other deck that is really popular now is Esper Gorios, which has won 3 challenges in the hands of the same person. Let's see if I can get their Magic Online name. And they only, I'm sure they maybe played some challenges in between, but in those 3 challenges they won. They only got 1 loss.
Nice. It's pretty hard to do.
Impressive, yeah.
So so this deck, it's like the Esper Blink package, but it's also got this second value package of Goryo's Vengeance and Atraxa. Is that the right deck?
Yeah. So
Okay.
Il Nano, let me link it to you really quick. That's the player whose deck list is getting copied a lot. So yeah, they are trying to, use Goryo's Vengeance on Atraxa or Gristlebrand, and they can discard those cards with Psychic Frog or Faithful Mending. Previously, you maybe have seen this deck not with Faithful Mending, but with Tainted Indulgence, but that card, is a draw 2, discard 1 effectively for a blue and a black. This deck wants the white card for Solitude, and even though Faithful Mending is kind of some card disadvantage, I think Quantum Riddler has somewhat fixed that, because as you get lower in cards in hand, the Riddler provides extra card advantage. It's quite a good combo of Psychic Frog, I'll add. I've had
Right.
turn 2 Frog, turn 3 Riddler, Ephemerate, and as I was doing my Riddler, Ephemerate, and my upkeep Ephemerate or draw step next turn, I was heavily considering just dumping the cards in my hand into my Frog because I was against a combo deck, so only very few of my cards matter. It's nice that with Riddler you can keep the best one card in your hand if you're trying to make this type of play. That might be the key point of interaction, and just go for the fastest clock possible, and you still have access to a ton of cards. Like you when you like keep going to one card on your Frog with your right before you draw with a Riddler in play, like you just end up going back to 3 each time. So it's not like you're just like going all in. It's just you're determining that you can afford to only need a couple resources that game to interact and can go more on your damage plan.
Right. Yeah, that sounds pretty nice. So Riddler, okay, I'll start with this. As a tangential observer of Modern, I definitely notice people trying kind of the new strong cards that come out in a lot of sets, and a lot of the time they don't stick around in Modern for that long because it's such a powerful format.
Yeah, I agree.
Based on your observations now, do you think Quantum Riddler is here to stay? I mean, how impressed have you been with the card in general?
I think it's here to stay. I'm certainly more impressed, I guess, with something like Goryo's because it can be really proactive about it. And, this deck is also playing Force of Negation and Solitude, whereas some of these other decks are pretty much only playing Solitude as a pitch spell. And, that gives you, like, you're playing this nice combination of a card that can really rebuild your hand, especially if you're low on cards, and then these cards that you have to 2-for-1 yourself to kind of stay in the game versus maybe Modern's faster decks. But so those play really well in combination. And then on top of that, you're presenting a pretty fast kind of combo yourself. The goal with this deck is not to, it doesn't even play Faithless Looting. That's not in the color, but I've seen lists with Faithless Looting and haven't been impressed because you're not trying to play Goryo's Vengeance on turn 2. You're trying to play it on turn 3 and have the Atraxa or Gristlebrand find an Ephemerate and then Ephemerate it after combat and keep it in play. That's sort of the signpost nut draw of the deck. And that play is really powerful, but also you only hit them for 7, and then you have a handful of interaction or maybe the ability to Goryo's again. But it's not like you Splinter Twin them and won. It's definitely possible to lose from those spots, but it's I'm sure it's in like the 90th percentile win rates or things if you have that turn 3 combo.
Right. And Goryo's is definitely something that's been good in the past. I guess Riddler, is it safe to say that it's pretty much just buddies with Ephemerate and that's why it's good? It's not really...
Yeah, all the decks
going
playing
to see play outside of that.
All the decks playing it that I've seen been good have Solitude, Ephemerate alongside the Riddler. So that certainly seems like the starting package for the card. It's blue, so it's interesting. You think you could play with Force and Subtlety, but it's just a lot better to be able to blink it.
Mm-hmm.
A 4/6 that costs 5 mana is also pretty annoying to kill in Modern. It doesn't get pushed.
Right.
Died even this number.
Yeah.
It's definitely large enough to kind of rumble.
Yeah, and since the first half of it is pretty free, even if you don't have Ephemerate sometimes. I mean, not free, but...
Yeah, I'll admit it's definitely like unimpressive some games in faster matchups, to just
I could see that.
You could definitely just end up doing the Riddler Ephemerate thing and losing. You definitely want to but it's just nice, and this deck is doing, a graveyardy thing, but it's just got, these reanimation targets and Goryo's, and the rest of the deck is kind of not a graveyardy thing at all. So that's a pretty like appealing thing to it, is that it's hard to like hate out, or you could probably just function and discard your bad cards to your looting effect or your Frog and then play out your fair game, and it's pretty powerful still.
It's interesting. It's seeing a little bit of play in Standard, but it honestly seems like it's probably a better Modern card than a Standard card. It's funny when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, Ephemerate is one of the strongest cards ever, and that's not in Standard, so...
Right.
It's kind of...
It's a kind of a big deal.
How simple Ephemerate is. It's even literally a common, but it's...
Right.
I kind of made the joke once. I think it's one of the best commons printed outside of Alpha, ever. Like, as far as...
Yeah, it is kind of insane, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a Modern Masters card, so you can almost upgrade it to a rare right there, in a way. Like, if they had to have printed it in Standard, it probably would have been a rare, but...
Yeah, of course.
Obviously, yeah, that doesn't matter too much. It's cool seeing Starfield Shepherd, too. I kind of wondered if that might see play with Ephemerate.
Yeah, so, that's a strategy where it's kind of interesting, because the stack's not the fastest, but it seems a bit more consistent. And certainly I've played the Goryo's deck a little bit, and sometimes you draw a bunch of reanimation targets or Goryo's in the wrong order, and this deck doesn't have that capability so much. Usually it's just looking at lands and spells being pretty good, but obviously it's a lot less disruptive and a lot less fast. I guess I'll add Nassif streamed a modern RCQ that he went 6-3 in. He didn't get published, but you could find it on his stream, I'm sure, with a similar list to kind of this more fair blue-white list, but he included White Orchid Phantom and Flagstones of Trocare. White Orchid Phantom is the white-white 2/2 flying first strike from MH3 that when it enters, you can destroy a non-basic land, and its controller searches their library for a basic land, puts it into play tapped, and shuffles. So that at least gives it an angle of attack against the big mana decks, because you can flicker that a lot. And I think traditionally this type of deck is really bad against big mana.
Right.
But that's a certainly good angle, and then on top of that, you can hit your own Flagstones to kind of play a rampant growth with a 2/2 flying on turn 2 or at any point in the game. And this deck is definitely really mana hungry, so having that ability. And that's a thing that, there used to be some Martyr of Sands deck when the One Ring was legal that were pretty popular, and they were using that combo as well of White Orchid and Flagstones, because if you're just kind of splashing blue or another color, or those decks, and the Seaf, we're splashing Haywire Might and like a Temple Garden too, because you can search for it with the Shepherd.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Did Nassif have a Hylia in his deck still?
He did. He had a couple. Yeah, he made room for it. He didn't have main deck Consigns or Spell Pierces or Raven Charms, I think. He just kind of had a bunch of...
Yeah, that makes sense.
Ephemerate.
How do you think Hylia has been in Modern? That's another one that's like kind of skipped over Standard. I mean, Standard, it's in such a weird spot. Maybe it's not fair to say that to these cards yet, but it's interesting to see it in Modern first.
Yeah, it's impressed me, though I'm not sure you can justify playing a lot of copies. It's pretty good with the Guide Pride package. I think I've seen it in Boros Energy a few times, and I've been impressed too. And what's kind of nice about it, and I'll take Boros Energy more as an example, is I think you could just put Hylia in your Boros Energy deck, and it's pretty good, and you didn't have to put any bad cards in your deck to make it good.
Right. Just in small numbers, I presume.
Yeah, so also because the trigger of drawing a card triggers even if you haven't gained 3 life yet. So just as an example, on turn 2, you can Warp Hylia. It gains a life off itself. You can play an Ocelot Pride, you gain a second life, and then on your end step, you can stack the Pride trigger above your Hylia triggers, get your token, gain a 3rd life, and still draw a card. And then you still have like a Soul Warden around later, which is obviously just going to be good with Ocelot Pride.
Gotcha. That's pretty nice. Plus just being some card advantage, yeah.
Yeah.
Seems pretty nice in some small numbers. Might as well just ask you, Boros Energy still kind of the top of the format, you think, or the most popular?
Boros Energy, if you just break down Modern by specific decks, is the most popular deck still. But this category of decks that have Solitude and Ephemerate, I believe, is like the most common thing you'll play against in Modern now, is a deck that has Solitude and Ephemerate, even though they're in different decks.
Gotcha. So they haven't settled on a list, but combined, it's more of the field.
Yeah.
That's a lot of mid-range stuff. Or if you, between Boros Energy and all of that, Goldfish at the moment, I don't know how accurate this is exactly, but Goldfish has Boros Energy at 14%. So if you think the Ephemerate stuff is, between 15 and 20%, that's quite a lot of the field that's just mid-range decks.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm lumping in that Goryo's deck, to be clear, as a Solitude Ephemerate deck, so that's...
Okay, that's got some unfair things going on, yeah. Okay.
But no, certainly, I mean, it's a lot of removal, that's for sure. The Boros deck is, playing Discharge, which is a card that mostly only works against creatures, and this deck is playing Solitude Ephemerate, which is also a thing that only works against creatures, so definitely something to look at if you can be winning without creatures in your deck, which... there are decks like that, like Belcher comes to mind as one of the top kind of strategies that basically doesn't use creatures at all. I mean, they use Tameshi, but that's also requires like kind of instant speed interaction a lot of the time.
Last time we talked about Modern, you were pretty high on Belcher, I remember.
Yeah.
Has that changed, or?
No, not at all, to be honest. I'm sure it's a thing that waxes and wanes a little bit more as people figure out what sideboard cards are good against it. But it certainly still just seems like this combo deck that has its own free counter magic, so it's pretty good at defending itself from other things in the format, and its combo even though there's plenty of things that are good against it. You know, it plays counter spells and bounce spells, and ultimately it's a 1-card combo. So they don't need a lot of things to go right to kill you with a Belcher, you know. It often feels like a 2 or 3-card combo when Lotus Bloom and Tameshi are in play, but those are just ways to speed up the deck or let it get out of interesting spots. You know, people talk about Consign being good against Belcher, for example, because, you know, it's hard for them to interact with the counterspell of it, but you can use Tameshi and Lotus Bloom to generate on turn 4. It's something like if your Lotus Bloom came off suspend and your opponent didn't consign that, or let's say they have a different counterspell, even if you like miss your land drop and you have Tameshi because it'll give you a land drop, it's like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 mana. So you can just spend 7 mana worrying for Belcher and activate it, and that doesn't get countered by Consign.
Yeah, definitely a strong combination.
Yeah.
This list I'm looking at, I'm trying to see what the newest cards in it. I guess it's pretty hard for this deck to hit a new card. This one's got a stock up in the sideboard.
Yep, I've spotted the occasional sideboard stock up.
Yeah.
Yeah, not a lot changes. There's some flex spots. People play some Stern Scoldings a lot of the time. Spell Snare is kind of a nice catch-all interactive thing that I kind of like because it also counters a decent amount of the ways people want to interact with you in the format sometimes, like the actual card counterspell, but also kind of can defend yourself from a frog or things like that.
Makes sense.
You know, when you're mono blue, your options are kind of limited. I know usually you see a sideboard Duskrow's Reliquary, which is a card that they're pretty bad at casting, but they can whir for it.
Gotcha. And it's at least something different than blue usually gets.
Yeah, it's a permanent answer to maybe a Pithing Needle or something instead of just trying to bounce it and having only a 1-turn window to win.
Yeah. Speaking of Edge of Eternities cards, we've got Pinnacle Emissary.
Yeah, so
people have been trying that.
Affinity was kind of a big breakout, and maybe unsurprisingly, when a deck full of almost all artifacts is a big breakout, it's gonna kind of really wax and wane in Modern. I think this deck has not proved itself to be so broken that you should just play it and, you know, beat through the hate every weekend, but also, you know, Modern sideboards are only 15 cards, and sometimes the format won't be hateful enough for you. A lot of these Solitude Ephemerate decks have Wrath the Skies in their sideboards, so that's kind of brutal.
Yeah, so I'm assuming what you mean is there's just really efficient artifact hate in Modern.
There's a lot, and almost all the colors have access to it. I guess obviously not like black or blue, but the other 3, if you're playing any of them, usually have some kind of huge blowout card you can play. Meltdowns even in Modern.
So the Emissary, for people who don't know, it's the 1 blue-red 3/3 from Edge of Eternities. It has Warp for a blue or a red, and it says whenever you cast an artifact spell, you create a 1/1 flying drone that can only block flyers. Is this? I mean, this affinity list I'm looking at is 4. Is this adding, was this deck a good deck before this card, or is this sort of awakening this deck?
No, this deck needed this card.
Okay.
The scariest draws from this deck are having the Pinnacle Emissary, Warped, playing a Mox Opal. You already have 3 artifacts, spending the mana from the Mox Opal, perhaps playing some 0 mana cards. You could even do... I've had my opponents go Emissary, Mox Opal, Springleaf Drum, Memnite, Thought Monitor, all in the first turn.
Yikes. Yeah.
And have a bunch of 1/1s. Now, it's kind of interesting because ultimately that's not a ton of power and toughness, but it's also not bad. But I've noticed what this deck does pretty well is play to the board pretty fast, not in a immediately lethal way, but maybe a 2 or 3 turn clock kind of way, especially if Kappa Cannoneer gets involved, and then have a Metallic Rebuke or a sideboard counterspell to kind of buy the 1 turn maybe it needs if its clock's a little too slow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I've kind of viewed this deck as pretty good against combo decks actually, because it's just pretty reliable at doing exactly what I said, where you just play out your hand really fast and are left with maybe a counterspell or 2, and then your sideboard cards also. You also have the kind of a Saga package, which Saga 1 mana artifacts are typically the type to be a little bit more disruptive, if anything.
Yeah, it's interesting. This I know it hasn't seen play in a long time. In Affinity, Arcbound Ravager is a card I'm thinking of, but it seems like it could be kind of good with Pinnacle Emissary.
Yeah, so these lists have a kind of mix of cranial plating, which seems to be kind of the preferred payoff.
Gotcha.
It's kind of old school, just equip it on a drone. It's a little less all in.
Mm-hmm.
Ravager just kind of requires you to have a one-shot kind of turn, whereas plating, if it just, if you've been hated out a little bit, plating can still just give like +4 power to each of your drones, and they have to kind of farm through them one by one potentially, or just die.
Yeah, I guess the big thing with Ravager was Inkmoth Nexus 2, which I'm now realizing they don't even have anymore. They just have Urza Saga. So,
yeah, they need a lot
enough.
of colored lands to do the emissary thing too, and also they have a bunch of thought monitors and thought casts. So I'm not even a fan of Darksteel Citadel in this deck. I know Steve streamed this deck a lot, and anytime you see someone playing with Citadel, he kind of shows some disgust at it.
Thinks it's greedy. Yeah, there are a lot of colored sources in this deck for sure, at least compared to some Affinity decks of past.
You really don't want to be counting on Mox Opal or Springleaf Drum as your colored source for Emissary. You really want it from a land. It's okay to do what I described without Mox Opal on turn 2 also. You can go Emissary, Drum, Memnite, 1-drop plus your zeros. That's a common draw too when they don't have Mox Opal. But you still want one of your lands to produce blue mana or red on the first turn.
Is this among one of the... It's hard for me to tell because I haven't played Modern in a long time. Is this one of the better decks, or is this...
It's just going to be kind of hard to tell. What happened was this deck kind of popped up and seemed really strong for like a week or two. And now it really seems like it's taken a step back. And I do think that, kind of with these white decks really popping up, and they all have Wrath of the Skies, even the Goria's deck. That's such a brutal card for this deck. Full of 0 mana cards, basically, that they only have to cast it for X equals 0, and they can destroy a lot of your deck. It's pretty brutal.
Yeah. Let's see. Some other decks that we have...
You wanted to bring up the control decks with...
Yeah, the new cards. Consult the Star Charts. It's obviously been really strong in Standard, and I've seen some people trying it in Modern. I was curious. Nassif has this blue-white control deck. I assume that he just built himself. I haven't seen it basically anywhere else that he was trying. And I linked you the image. I just was curious what you thought.
Yeah, I've seen 2 different types of blue-white control. I like Nassif's way more. There's some other category of people that like to play with Narset and Days Undoing. I think that's terrible.
Yeah,
it's been maybe a little bit more impressive this week with Quantum Riddler being so popular, but Days Undoing, I'm just not ever going to register that in Modern. I can't imagine.
No, I've never liked that. Yeah.
One of the funnier things about Nassif's list is he has 4 main deck Dress Down and 2 main deck Rest in Peace, which is kind of really weirdly hateful. He jokes on stream. He had 1 Rest in Peace for a while, and he said every time he drew it, his opponent could never beat it. So then he put another one.
He put in a second.
There are certainly a lot of decks that the coverage of that matters. Even versus Boros Energy, I'm not sure he'd choose to have both Rest in Pieces in his deck post-board against them, but you're kind of playing a way of outclassing maybe their aggro draws with stuff like Supreme Verdict and Solitude and your white X removal spells. And then you just want something that kind of permanently covers Flage, so it makes sense when you're not using your graveyard yourself. And then that's an example of a deck that I was trying to point out. Rest in Peace doesn't sound that good against, but probably is still offering unique coverage. There are definitely some Modern decks that use their graveyard a bit more heavily that traditionally are that's a really annoying resource, for a blue-white control deck to deal with. Pretty well that you top 8 at a Grand Prix where you didn't even play Rest in Peace because the graveyard decks were so bad of matchups. But on the other hand, I'm sure a main deck Rest in Peace would swing the matchup pretty heavily.
I don't remember at the time if I had considered that. Yeah, I think the problem with that deck,
it wouldn't have made sense. But,
right? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, but something like this doesn't use graveyard. So
yeah, exactly. And we've seen. I saw main deck Surgical, at the PT Hogak or whatever, many years ago, and kind of the same thing in blue-white control.
It makes sense. And in this blue-white control deck, you have a bunch of Solitudes, so it's you could pitch it to that.
Also white. Yeah, he's got a Brain Surge too, and a Jace the Mind Sculptor. He's moved around those numbers a lot. Brain Surge always looks pretty powerful. Kind of, I can see it, maybe playing out better than Stock Up. I guess now that Consult got printed, he's moved to just 4 Consults. Before that was printed, he had a lot of Brain Surges, but occasionally you run into Bowmasters and Brain Surge just feels completely terrible.
Yeah, Brain Surge, I have experience with that because there was a historic qualifier thing. I can't remember how long ago this was. I think it was when Boros Energy first came out, basically, and all those cards were legal on historic in historic on Arena. And I made day 2 of that, and I was playing a control deck with a bunch of Brain Surges on it in it, so that was fun.
Yeah,
It's a
another
pretty
deck
strong
I've kind
card.
of spotted in every now and then is Living End, which is kind of nice because you can shuffle back in your Living End. I'll
Nice.
just put it on top and Cascade next turn. But
Yeah, but I mean, as good as a card that is, it clearly looks like he thinks Consult the Star Charts is better.
yeah, I mean, I'm sure he's just trying it a little bit. But yeah,
Sure.
he's moving towards a lot more instants, it seems like. Usually with control decks, you see them either be really instant speed heavy or really sorcery speed heavy, and it's usually pretty good to pick one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He also has the combo of 1 Ultima and 2 Teferi Time Raveler. Ultima, unlike Days
Nice.
Undoing, does not care if it's your turn, so even in a matchup where maybe Ultima's not very good, if you cast it on your opponent's upkeep, it's kind of like a time stop. It just ends the turn.
Right. I guess you could use it as a counterspell in that sense too.
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you don't have to do it on just their upkeep. You could, and you still destroy all the creatures too, so you could get a lot of value out of it
Yeah.
and speed potentially.
Yeah, I have to imagine this deck's probably like tier 2 at best, but I'd be lying if I said it wouldn't be a deck I'd be interested in building. It doesn't look like it's terribly expensive on Magic Online. I don't know price is great, but I'm assuming like Solitudes are expensive, and maybe his
Yeah,
mana
I
base,
don't
but
really
not
know.
much else.
Um,
So,
yeah,
you
it's
use a
probably-
rental service, right? So
Yeah, so I don't ever see.
fair.
Those
So,
are- Go ahead.
and then the only other thing was I saw people playing like a Wizards deck with like Thundertrap Trainer and
Yeah,
Consult and stuff.
and Tameo and Flare and Flage.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that deck existed before Consult. It probably similarly just played some kind of 3 mana card advantage spell, or I'm not sure exactly, but yeah, I mean, Flage is really strong, so I understand why they played that deck. My experience playing Jeskai control decks with Flage is that I just ultimately feel like Boros Energy is the best place to go when you want to play with Flage in Modern.
That makes sense.
A really kind of powerful thing to like I think I was talking about how Rest in Peace is covering the spot of Flage from this blue-white control deck, but it's totally embarrassing against a lot of the rest of their deck. It does stop Ajani from flipping too, which is kind of unique, but it they're a small creature aggro deck, kind of like the old days of Zoo, which there's also a Zoo Flage deck in Modern, but if you go too all in on attacking just Flage from such a proactive deck, that's not going to bode well for you. Whereas I think the Jeskai control deck, like, as weird as it sounds, it's a little underpowered before it has Flage. So if someone does go a little bit overboard on trying to beat the Flage part of your deck, it might actually be like a winning strategy for them.
Right. Boros Energy also is nice in that its card quality is so high that it can be the bigger mid-range deck, it seems like, in a lot of matchups, and then it's also just really assertive. It's got all the cheap creatures that can kill your opponent quickly too, so
Yeah, that's how I felt about it. We'll see if it actually stands up through the this Riddler kind of meta that's popping up, because that's certainly a mid-range deck that really looks like it's going over the top of something like Boros specifically.
okay, interesting. Speaking of over the top, how do these like Eldrazi Tron decks look to you?
Yeah, so I brought this up because I've noticed a huge increase of Eldrazi Tron recently. And it's kind of interesting because there's been another Eldrazi deck in the format that kind of has stepped aside, and that's like the Rumble Emrakul ramp deck that has like half the cards of the Brood Scale deck, but instead of the combo, it mostly just has like more ramp and Kozilek's returns. But the Eldrazi Tron one specifically it's kind of interesting. I feel like the payoff for playing with the Tron lands is specifically Ugin. Ugin doesn't really work with Eldrazi Temple, and turn 3ing it off your Tron lands. It's basically the new best thing ever to play off 3 Tron lands. And also, I think versus, that blue-white deck we started the episode with, if you cast this and it doesn't get countered, you like win the game. Like, even if it's not turn 3. it's just completely over for a deck like that kind of is kind of just trying to press its board advantage somewhat slowly. And this thing either exiles multiple permanents the turn you cast it by zeroing, or maybe you just have spare mana, or it just exiles one permanent and goes to 9 loyalty, which is an incredibly high number to try to get through. And then if you untap with it, it's really easy to exile all your opponent's permanents with it. I mean, this card is like the 8 mana Ugin for 1 less mana almost, and better if you untap with it than that one was.
Yeah, it's a pretty crazy powerful card. So
Yeah.
obviously playing it on turn 3 or 4 is going to be really good.
Yeah. I found this deck, it's interesting. You don't have a lot of, I guess, card selection is how I'd put it. There's no Stirrings or Rumble like the green deck. But Ugin and Karn are both and Karn the Great Creator, to be clear. Karn is a really good payoff against a combo deck, and Ugin is a really good payoff against a board presence deck. So when it lines up correctly, your deck looks really good. But I do notice it struggles sometimes of, drawing Ugins versus a combo deck or Karns versus Boros Energy, stuff like that.
Yeah, cutting Stirrings is tough. I think that it was quite good in this sort of deck.
Yeah, it's kind of just impossible to fit in when you play 12 Urza lands, Ugin's Labyrinth, Eldrazi Temple. That's already 20 lands. So.
No, yeah, I totally get it why it's not here, but it is a cost that it's not.
Yep.
I mean, if the format, in my humble observation of it being some of the bigger decks being kind of mid-rangey decks, seems like this might be a good spot to be in.
Yeah, definitely. We'll see if, I saw in that challenge, I think Nassif beat this deck twice with his White Orchid Phantom main deck version, so that's certainly a direction they can take to maybe hedge against this deck. This deck I'm looking at now has 1 basic. I think sometimes at the most I've seen 2. So,
gotcha.
Not to mention, no matter how many basics they have, you're just going to do a great job of preventing them from having 7 mana on turn 3 or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And then so the green red version of this deck, is that not really seeing play at the moment, or is that deck still good too?
It pops up. I would think it would be fine.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why it kind of goes to the side. I think maybe a lot of players who play that deck maybe are playing Broodschale instead, which still has kind of the Emrakul Rumble Stirrings package.
Right.
Definitely good at going over the top. But I'll say I played Broodschale. I think I mentioned this last week and was not impressed with Walking Ballista. And I've kind of noticed the Broodschale list recently. I've just moved away from it, which is a fair response. Even one of our viewers, Julian, messaged me with a list that had Thought-Knot Seers. That made a ton of sense to me because, I just think, Ballista is mostly, it's a combo kill card and even kind of a combo enabler card because you can play it for 0 to trigger your Broodschale or to trigger your Blade of the Bloodchief if it was equipped. So sometimes it lets you go faster, but it's a pretty dead card for most decks in the format besides Boros Energy and Affinity.
Right. Yeah. Is it a good card versus Boros Energy, or is it just it does something there?
Well, specifically when you equip it with Blade of the Bloodchief and you if you ping a creature, then it gets a counter back. So it was a pretty potent kind of mini combo you had against their deck full of 1 toughness creatures.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of had that Goblin Sharpshooter feel. So yeah, I would say it was actively good against Boros Energy, but almost kind of dead against anything else besides that in Affinity.
Right.
So it makes sense. I've seen lists with Karn and Ugin's Labyrinth and Devourer of Destiny and more Emrakuls for more kind of 7+ cost cards, and that's been an interesting kind of mono green direction. That's kind of a hybrid of the green red deck you were talking about, but still Broodschale.
Mm-hmm. Just because we were talking about it, I clicked on a Broodschale list on Goldfish, and it shows me this person played with 2 Tezzerets. Cruel Captain.
Yeah, I played with 1 recently. I was a big fan of it in the sideboard. I could see building around it in the main too. If you had a Ballista to search for, then it's still an infinite win payoff too, or infinite mana payoff. And it's also, it's kind of silly to say, but being a Planeswalker for Emrakul can matter a little bit, just if it hits your graveyard.
Sure. Yeah.
That card, I've played with it in the Affinity deck as well. Pretty interesting. It's almost kind of a Karn-like card where I feel like it's pretty good at finding those Saga bullets once again that might disrupt your opponents pretty well. And if you're playing an artifact deck specifically, it can have a lot of loyalty. The Broodschale deck a little less so, but you might be able to play it and get a couple activations out of it. If you are playing Ballista, you could put a counter on your Ballista with its 0 too. But yeah, I would say it doesn't seem like a card that would be very good against decks playing to the board, and it's a card that's pretty impressive against decks that aren't, including combo decks, just because you can find maybe your Grafdigger's Cage or your Vexing Bauble with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this guy could have just been trying it in the main deck, but maybe it's more of a sideboard card.
Yeah, or, depending on the meta, the sideboard cards could certainly become main deck cards. But I'd be a little weirded out to play like 4 in my Brood Scale deck and go all in on them. But
right. I mean, it does mean like he's got some one-ofs, Vexing Bauble, Soul Guide Lantern, whatnot in the main deck, and then he's got even more 1-drops in the sideboard, which, I imagine maybe if you only have 4 Urza Sagas, you wouldn't want to play too many of those cards. But if you're also adding Tezzerets, I mean, you get to see them even more often. And
yeah, no, I think that I agree with that. I do think when those bullets are good, usually aren't against aggro decks, but it's just pretty redundant, and it's pretty helpful to have instead of just playing a bunch of Grafdigger's Cage or Soul Guide Lanterns. I'd much prefer to have like my 1 Lantern, my 1 Cage, and my 2 Tezzerets or whatever.
Let's see what else is going on. Oh, I don't remember Domain Zoo being so high on the metagame share. Is there something
it was on
new?
Our episode before, maybe.
Not. Oh, okay. I could just not be remembering. Has it been seeing a lot of play?
Yeah, I'll be honest. This is a deck that doesn't impress me. It became a 4 Flage deck. It seems like it's got this. It looks a lot like Boros Energy, I guess. And the advantages of playing a lot of colors is you get Leyline Binding, and you try to do the Leyline Scion combo, and that Leyline Scion combo, I'm not that impressed with it.
So let's see. You get a
4/4 flying hexproof like Vigilance Lifelink, and all your creatures have all those abilities
for 2 mana.
For 2 mana, which sounds really good, but I think a lot of.
But you have to draw both those cards.
I think the decks are pretty good at answering the Leyline of the Guild Pact, and also that combo is not very useful against like a combo deck or one of these big mana ramp decks necessarily either. It's not even scary for them. So you're kind of only playing this combo because, versus Boros Energy or whatever, it sounds amazing. And that's maybe an example where this combo works, especially in the main deck. They have a couple Thraben Charms that can kill the Leyline of the Guild Pact, but I've watched some of these Boros Energy draws where they like have bombardment and they go really wide, and like because they can attack and sack through the bombardment, like I've watched them kill through this in play.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then the white decks with Philia can attack and blink out Leyline of the Guild Pact, and then if they have like Ephemerate Solitude, like that's the other matchup where I feel like you're kind of looking at this, and they just have a lot of answers to it. They also have like Witch Enchanter and Flicker Risk for their Witch Enchanter as a land, so like on turn 3 they could make that play to clear your Leyline or things like that.
Yeah, I guess all anyone has to do is just kill one of the ley lines, and then it's just a 4/4.
Yeah, also Scion is still colorless on the stack. I've seen people bring in Consign to Memory against Domain, which sounds a little silly, but they also have Leyline Binding, which is pretty much the entire spell of that card is built into a triggered ability. So you actually hit both Scion and Leyline Binding from this deck with Consign. I'm not sure I'd board in 4 if I played against this deck, but certainly bringing in a couple or whatever is kind of reasonable.
That totally makes sense. There's Flage and Fable too that you could use it in minor cases against.
Yeah. But yeah, this deck to me, I just think I'd rather play Boros Energy if I wanted to be a Flage mid-range deck.
Okay, that makes sense.
I mean, the mana base it's not good. It's not like, it's functionable, but as soon as your opponent starts messing with it, it's kind of a disaster. Whereas like the Boros deck doesn't have that issue at all. The Boros has, the best mana in the whole format, basically.
Yeah. It's funny, the picture on Goldfish is of Tribal Flames.
Yeah, which isn't in the deck anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, wait, there's no Tribal Flames. Which I guess makes sense, but yeah, it's interesting. And then I guess the last thing to talk about would be like all the unfair decks. I know we touched on Belcher.
Yeah, I wanted to bring up the Grixis Reanimator deck.
Gotcha.
Because that was another deck that kind of popped up, and it didn't even have anything new.
Yeah, it's pretty high on the metagame share on this.
It took down a challenge, and a lot of people started playing it. So this is a deck that kind of is similar to, I guess, what the Dimir mid-range decks were looking like, but it cut a lot of its interaction for something more proactive. It's a blue-black deck, basically splashing red for Faith's Looting and sideboard cards. And it has, Psychic Frog, kind of the premier reason to play blue-black in Modern. But it has 4 Unearth, 4 Persist, 4 Archon of Cruelty, 4 Abhorrent Alculus, and 3 Emperor Bones, or some split like that, as well as some Thought Scours to help get some cards in the graveyard too. So this is kind of more like a really proactive Frog deck. It has Thoughtseize and Fatal Push and Spell Pierce is pretty much the only main deck interaction. But it can, it can just have turn 1 Looting, turn 2 Persist Archon as kind of a great draw, or, I've seen it have turn 2 Unearthed Oculuses a lot. And then those things happen way more likely, I guess, on turn 3 when Psychic Frog gets involved. Emperor of Bones with Archon is pretty good. Persist on Oculus or even Frog is not totally embarrassing either. Also, Unearth on Emperor Bones sometimes saves you a mana, things like that. Unearth is also just, really good in this deck.
I can see why people are trying this. I know in Legacy, Blue-Black Reanimator was kind of a menace, and it's still probably good, even though they've banned some cards. And obviously, we don't have Force of Will. Persist is worse than Reanimate, all that. But, I mean, the Frog plus, Big Dummy, Archon of Cruelty isn't a legendary creature, but it's still very good to get back.
Yeah, also they sideboard Harbinger of the Seas, which sounds weird from a 3-color deck, but like I said, they really only have 1 red spell. And then with Unearth and Persist and that card, they can, kind of power it out in matchups where that card's good too.
Gotcha. Get it back if they ever kill it, that sort of thing.
My opinion of this deck is kind of similar to Affinity, actually, because kind of the week before the Affinity decks started really dominating, this deck was all over the place. It's probably died down a little. And it's kind of just that this is a really strong graveyard deck. But I think even though, the card Psychic Frog especially is pretty good, like against, just pure graveyard hate, I do think this deck is a bit soft to the format adapting to it and playing a lot of graveyard hate.
Yeah, it is pretty linear overall. Besides, the Frog, it's really the only thing it has going on.
Yeah.
If the graveyard gets Rest in Peace or Surgical a lot or something.
Yeah, and you're also, you have Thoughtseize, and maybe some Spell Pierces, but you can't really interact with graveyard permanents in play as a Grixis deck, just kind of fundamentally. It's not like they're choosing not to play, cards that like Nature's Claim. They just can't.
Right. Are there any other unfair decks you like at the moment?
I wanted to bring up Neoform, not that it changed much, though it's kind of become a little bit more refined, and Yuki Ichikawa won the Modern Showcase Challenge, which is like that small field tournament that you have to qualify for, and then the winner gets qualified for the 8-person Mox event that I think might be even this weekend. It's sometime soon. He qualified playing this deck, and Canister also won the challenge with it. So certainly, some of the top players in the game respect this deck. It's the fastest deck in Modern, and that's just, I mentioned this on our first episode, but it asks a lot of you as far as interaction goes, and it has its own counter spells, its own Veil of Summers, its own bounce spells or Nature's Claims, so it has some ability to fight through interaction as well.
Does this also fall into the category where if it became really popular, people could easily hate it out?
Sort of. Cards like Grafdigger's Cage, Vexing Bauble, Subtlety come to mind. I think the cards that are extremely good against this deck can go in a lot of decks, but I think some decks might not really have access to the right cards against this deck, especially because sometimes those cards are a little bit too much of self-hosers for themselves.
Gotcha. So it's not quite as easily hated.
Yeah, I think people have to change what decks they play. I think, when I think about beating this deck, Living End comes to mind because I just think Subtlety and Force Negation are like the 2 best things you could play that make sense as main deck cards, and Living End is like the deck that just gets to play, it plays 4 of each. So that's sort of definitely what comes to mind. You want to be playing 1 and 0 mana spells to beat this deck that interact with it. So that's kind of a big ask.
Right. Yeah, that checks out. I mean, Cage is a colorless spell. Right?
Yeah, definitely. But
you have to be on the play and have it in your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, and like also, that's a thing that just sits there that they could bounce. They didn't have to invest anything. It's kind of face up, whereas like Subtlety and Force Negation are like things they have to set up to play around, and you might be doing your own proactive thing at the same time. it's nice that Veil of Summer doesn't actually stop Subtlety, for example. Also, some things about Vexing Bauble and maybe even Subtlety versus decks that don't have a lot of removal. This deck can play Allosaurus Rider on turn 1 if it wants to play around certain cards, if they're not scared of removal spells from your deck and they're scared of stack interaction. And that kind of gets the spot, because that's what you're trying to hit with Bauble and Subtlety is the Rider. So if they sneak that in under those types of cards, obviously against Subtlety that's not always possible, but you don't have time to dig for it, maybe. I could definitely see, if I was playing this deck, I would imagine, especially in an open deck list event, I would be looking for opportunities to play my Rider on turn 1. If, some decks don't have removal for a creature at all, so.
Yeah. It's kind of a funny play. Just playing that card in general, I guess, is pretty funny. But the last unfair deck I'll ask about is only because it's third on the MTG Goldfish meta share, and that's Amulet Titan.
Yeah, I have nothing really bad to say about Amulet. I was looking at some stats recently, and it seems to consistently be like around a 50% win rate deck, which is pretty impressive for what it is in the format. I think this is a great deck to be playing in Modern, to take to your events if it's the type of deck you like to play. I would not sway you against playing it. Definitely, I think the jokes about it being hard have become a little bit overdone. You can look up Dom Harvey on Twitter. He wrote a full free guide for this deck. I definitely recommend that. I'll give a little short and sweet, but you see the scape shifts in this deck. If you have a scape shift and either an Amulet or a Spelunking in play, and you have 4 lands, you can win. So you try to figure out from there both how you can win, but also when you're playing the game and you have a scape shift in your hand, that's what you want to be thinking about, is setting up how you can win. And you can also, Graveyard Hate kind of can beat that scape shift line, but not always. If you have 7 lands and you cast scape shift, you can get your normal kill con, but also a bounce land, a Beseju, and an Urza Saga, and then you get to Beseju their Soul Guide Lantern or whatever with all your triggers on the stack, and then they exile your graveyard, and then you sack your lands again, and because you got an Urza Saga, you get Delirium, which matters later for your Shifting Woodlands kill. But yeah, there's a lot of lines this deck has. Blood Moon and the like have been kind of the big hate things for this deck, I'm sure. Subtlety also pretty good against this deck. It is a lot more of an all-in combo deck than I think it was many years ago, where it was kind of like a big mana deck that also was an all-in combo deck. This version has become way more combo killy, but also really good at it.
Is this deck really only 200 ticks on Magical Line?
Yeah, seems like it.
Sounds kind of appealing as a first deck to try, maybe for me.
Yeah, it
it's
might
funny
also
that
be popular.
Yeah. It's funny, you switch over to tabletop, apparently scape shifts are $1 million because it's goes from $200 to $900 in real life. That's funny.
I learned that recently. I was looking at my friend, he was selling his collection, shout out to Darius, and I was looking over his cards, and I'm like, I have 3 or 4 scape shifts from when I built this deck. If they're really that expensive. Wow.
Was it expensive when you bought it, whenever you bought them? I don't remember Scape Shift ever being an expensive card.
I feel like they were $10 or $15 or whatever.
Woo!
Yeah. I think they printed multiple pre-con commanders that have commanders that really care about a card like Scape Shift. They're just really lands mattery decks, and they don't put Scape Shift in them. But on the finance side of things, as someone that's kind of used to pay attention to it a lot, working for a store, I feel like any day now they'll put Scape Shift in a pre-con. So
probably, or Secret Lair or something. Yeah, they have been. Anytime a card gets over $100, pretty much.
It's probably already on the sheets.
Probably, it's probably already coming. So I could build it on Magical Line, and then sometime in the future they'll probably print some Scape Shifts, and then I can move in for the IRL deck.
No, it's a great deck. Nothing bad to say about it, really.
Cool. Any other decks you wanted to cover?
Yeah, I was looking through Goldfish. Obviously, there's a lot of decks I haven't really mentioned, but none of them seem like they've really changed that much. Oh, no, you were right. Domain Zoo wasn't as high up. We talked about it in our first episode. It wasn't as high up. The deck that was in second before was Is It Prowess, which has taken a huge drop-off. So to
Yeah,
me,
that's right.
that's a sign that like that might have just been like people trying Steel Cutter in Modern, and their deck is proactive and fast and powerful. So like I'm sure they had some success, um, and I'm sure if you play this deck, I know a lot of people built it in paper because it was also I'm not sure it's cheap, but like it didn't have a lot of new cards besides Steel Cutter, and it got a big boost from it. Like you definitely should play Steel Cutter in this deck. So I think that was kind of the appeal for people building it in paper that already had a significant Modern collection. They probably only looked at this deck and are like, oh, I just have to get like Steel Cutter and a few other cards. Um, it's
Yeah, so
fast.
this is probably one of those examples where the new card was the hot rage for a little bit, but it's not actually a top tier card in Modern.
Yeah, it's a weird category where it's correct for them to play Cutter, and it's probably one of the best cards in the deck, but it didn't jump the deck actually by enough to do that. But I see it won a challenge last week. I mean, as a deck capable of winning, it
Yeah.
there's like 5 challenges a week now or whatever, but that doesn't take away from winning them. Yeah,
sense.
nothing else really jumps out. I guess on the topic, a lot of these Philia Overlord Orzhov shells have now moved to playing Riddler, but I've seen a lot of other builds. I've seen people go back to Ketramos. I think an appeal of going back to Ketramos is main decking Relic if you think main deck Graveyard Hate's good. So it's probably that week I was talking about where the Grixis deck really shined, where people were like, well, I'm just going to play the version of my deck that has main deck Relic. And that's a reasonable thing to keep in mind if you're playing this type of deck, that you can do that. And on that same topic of things you can keep in mind to attack the meta, I've seen these decks move back to no blue splash. And I think the appeal to that is to play with White Orchid Phantom, which is kind of hard to pull off in a 3-color deck. So it's kind of weird to not have Consign but have White Orchid Phantom. But I do think Phantom's one of the best cards you can play against these Eldrazi Tron decks, if you're flickering it.
Yeah, it's a really strong card. I didn't even know that card existed until I saw it not that long ago, since it's just a Modern Masters card, but it's quite strong.
Yeah, another nice matchup for it is Belcher, because they don't play basic lands at all. So
Nice.
Keep in mind, I guess, if you're not a Belcher expert or familiar with that matchup, it is not weird for them to sideboard one mountain 4 cards like that, or Beseju.
Oh yeah, this guy's got an island in his sideboard.
Yeah, mountain's usually the one I see, even though it doesn't cast your blue spells, because if you don't get it searched out of your deck by your opponent and you hit it with Belcher, it does double damage if you hit mountain with Belcher. So
yeah,
that's
it's funny.
It means you have a lot more leeway on it still being in your library when you use your Belcher.
Right, but I guess island casts your spells, so that's why this person's got that. But...
Yeah, I've seen both too, I guess, if
Okay.
you really feel like you're getting hated on that access.
Yeah.
I guess I'm scrolling through. I saw some hammer lists have picked up Tezzeret. Makes sense.
Search for the hammer.
Yeah, and then also now that I'm looking at lists, I don't see Tezzeret in the first few I've clicked, but what I saw was also they were playing Steel Cutter, and that made some sense to me because Tezzeret's pretty good at allowing you to double spell, because it's kind of just multiple spells in one card. But looks like everybody has decided to not do that anymore already. So, oh well.
Mono white control. I'm down in the less than 1%, so we should probably stop.
Yeah.
But
I lost to that deck as Domain Zoo, the mono white land destruction deck, and that's a great example of that deck sounds horrible against Boros Energy.
Yeah.
Amazing against a deck that has a fragile mana base.
this guy's got 4 emergency eject
Yeah.
from Edge of Eternities Limited, not so All-Star Unlimited. All right. That'll do it for now, folks. We'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Yep. All right, so I bought a Switch 2 recently.
No way.
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it, but I was like, I can't. I have too many PlayStation 5 games I've bought and are still sealed that I need to play.
Yeah, I'm not much of a big console gamer. I had the Switch, but I haven't gotten a console besides the Switch or the Switch 2 in a very long time. And
They're pretty good consoles.
I walked into Walmart and said, if it's there, I'll buy it, and it was there. So
Darn. Unlucky.
yeah, it was the one that was 50 extra bucks, but came with Mario Kart World.
Okay.
Then the game I bought though was Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is kind of the premier game on that. And
Oh, is that fun?
yeah, I gotta
That's
say,
interesting.
I kind of had low expectations, but a friend asked
Sure.
if I played it because they heard good things, and then I'm like, okay, and I played through it. And I don't know if anybody's played Super Mario Odyssey, but it's pretty similar to that. It's got a huge world, and you kind of just smash around everything, and it's kind of silly. You know, it's obviously somewhat of a kid's game, or mostly a kid's game, but
Yeah.
It's got some puzzles, and you kind of just smash around and run around, and it's got a lot of exploring. Pretty entertaining. I know I remember you had, or maybe still have, a hat that just says Donkey Kong on it. I don't know if you're a big Donkey
Oh yeah, I think it's got a picture of him. Maybe
Yeah.
it says Donkey Kong on the back.
Yeah.
I still have that hat somewhere, but it's really sun bleached, so I don't really
Yeah.
wear it. I liked Super Mario Odyssey. It's
Yeah.
you
I
know,
liked it too.
can't play it for more than like an hour at a time, you know, but
Gotcha. Yeah.
it was a good game. Nostalgic.
I would say, you know, this new era of these video games, you know, people complain about the price point on the Switch games moving to like 70 or 80 bucks. And there's a great clip I saw from a guy who's a big variety streamer, Northern Lion is his name, where he said, you know, like, you just got to do your research on video games, because almost no video game feels like it's worth what it is. They're either like horribly overpriced, or it's just like the game you play infinite hours on, like he like Slay the Spire or whatever. He's just like, Slay the Spire should cost you more than like a used car in reality, or things like that. $60.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's definitely been my experience where
Yeah.
some games I treat them as if they were several $100s, and some games it's like I shouldn't have even paid $20 for it or
Yeah.
whatever, you know.
So really just, you know, maybe don't buy games on release. Maybe hear some things about it.
I do know, for what it's worth, games have gotten super expensive to make. Like they cost more to make than big blockbuster movies.
Yeah,
So-
I don't know if you knew this about the Switch 2, but I'm guessing this is related. The Switch 2 won't have cartridges for their games. There is a cartridge slot on it for Switch 1 games, to be clear, so you can...
I heard a bit about it. Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
love that.
I was also able to port over all of my Switch 1 games, like downloads, to it with my same account, which was already kind of cool. But yeah, I mean, physically owning games is obviously something people are very attached to, and it's certainly a little weird having digital only for the Switch 2 games, but I get it, because it's also like, it's a weird thing to spend money on as a company. And if you think about it, like, it's...
Especially because now the discs or the chips or whatever, they're not even really complete anyways on their own. They need the internet data to work.
Yeah, exactly. You need to download things
stuff.
anyways. Which is, I guess, bringing me to another thought recently that, you know, GameStop probably is really suffering from this, but I've heard GameStop is really moving into card games, which their name still works for, to be fair. They don't even have to really rebrand.
Sure. Gonna
but
have magic events at
makes sense.
GameStop soon.
Yeah, probably. It's probably
Maybe
Pokemon.
just Pokemon.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know. Magic's getting huge. The Universes Beyond is certainly successful and bringing in a lot of new players. So
Yeah, totally.
it brings in a lot of the type of players that Wizards wants, which are people that buy booster packs and not.
And would go to a GameStop and play some Commander or whatever.
Yeah.